How are y'all today? Good? My name is Matt Raible, and I've been driving this VW bus for the past month. And we're talking about art today. It's kind of a work of art. It's been a 10-year project. I finished it a month ago, and it's been pretty fun to drive around. It's great to be in London. I've been here once before on my honeymoon, and all I did was walk between train stations and have a pint. And I think that counts, but I'm obviously here a couple more days this time, so that's nice. As I said, my name is Matt Raible. I grew up in the backwoods of Montana with no electricity and no running water for 16 years. And I had to walk 2 miles to the bus stop every day. And yes, it was uphill both ways. Actually, we used to have a Commodore 64 hooked up to a generator in my parents' bedroom, which was in a separate house. And if you wanted to go in there and play Donkey Kong, you actually had to go in there and start the fire and then warm up the TV. And then you could actually, sit there and play a game. So it was like a 30-minute process. So I have a strange obsession with Volkswagen vans, and obviously with VW buses. And this is the third or the fourth stop on the Volkswagen tour of 2016. I'm happy to say that it's been in 2 shows so far, and we won our class in both shows. So that's pretty exciting. So today I'm here to talk about how to become an Angular artist. And if you look at WikiHow on how to become an artist, they mention a few things. Part 1 of 3 is learn the basics on your own. Take some time and try various mediums of art. Recognize your strength. Get the supplies you need. And so that's kind of what we're going to be doing here today is, learning the basics. And then part 2 is learning from others. And part 3 is promoting your work. So if we look at Angular and we look at jobs posted on LinkedIn, you can see that Angular has quite a few more than the other candidates for JavaScript MVC frameworks. You look at Backbone, they actually still have a stronghold, and a lot of people are still using that and looking for those skills. We have Ember.js, we have Knockout.js, and we have React. And if you looked at this slide about a year ago, React would be much smaller, so they've had some tremendous growth in the last year or two. If you look at the growth of the jobs over about the last 2.5 years, you'll see that Angular has had the most growth of all those frameworks, and Ember has done pretty well as well, and old Knockout's kind of dying a bit there. And you'll notice those last 2 months, April and June, are pretty close to each other, so it's been somewhat flat. No one's gone up a whole lot in the last couple months. If you looked at skills, so this is who puts AngularJS or Angular or React on their LinkedIn profile. And the funny thing about searching for these frameworks is that you have to know whether to add .js or whether you don't leave anything on there at all. And it's funny because if you search like on dice.com and you search for Knockout, it actually prompts you for Knockout space JS. But if you search for those 2 words, there's going to be a ton of things on there. So if you're interested in the exact terms I use to present or create these graphs, I'm happy to do that. Most of them I put .js on the end, except for Angular. I just put AngularJS. So you can see tons more Angular jobs or tons more Angular developers. And you actually have to take Angular out of the picture to see what the rest look like. Still, a lot of people know Backbone. That was very popular in 2009, 2010. So it's still kind of up there. And then everyone has been learning React a lot in the last couple of years. So if you look at the growth over the last 1.5 years, 2 years, you can see that people are just learning Angular right and left, and a lot of people are adding it to their profile. Google Trends. If you look at AngularJS on Google Trends, it's just dwarfing the rest of them. There aren't many others that really compete with it. And what about Angular 2? It's interesting to actually add Angular 2 to this and see that it's actually rising very quickly as well. I also added Oracle Jet to this. Has anyone heard of Oracle Jet? No? The last time there we go, one guy. So they announced Oracle Jet at Java 1 last year, and it's basically built on top of Knockout, and it's Oracle's framework for building web applications, mostly used internally, but also announced in open source to Java 1, so it is out there. I did actually use it on a project because I did work for Oracle for about 1.5 years, and so it's there. This all proves one thing. Angular is a hot skill to have. So who wants to learn Angular? We got 4 people. Come on. Okay, who knows AngularJS? Okay, so that's about half the room. Who knows Angular 2? Okay, there's about 10 of you. You guys could take off if you want and go to see another session. I mean, there's the Java EE one next door, if you already know it. I've been really enthusiastic about learning Angular 2. You know why? Because I'm a consultant. And everyone's got AngularJS apps, and they've been interested in migrating them to Angular 2. But at the same time, as a Java developer, the TypeScript thing is appealing to me. I was a JavaScript developer way before I was a Java developer, so I've never really hated JavaScript that much as like a hardcore Java developer does. But the TypeScript thing is pretty cool. I do love IntelliJ, and so what it does is it kind of brings IntelliJ back and makes it better again because of those types and because of interfaces and things like that, you can right-click and generate methods and things like you can do in Java. So with AngularJS, hello world is pretty simple. You just have a doc type HTML5 at the top. You have this ng app here. You have hello world, an input field, and then you can actually show it there. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like just to prove that I can write some code. I do this like a lot of developers do it. Copy and paste. So there we are. And if we open that, all right, there it is. And you see that old flash of unstyle. Oh, see? Thank you. I do that a lot. I'll probably do it again. Or I forget to mirror the displays here. So bump that up a little. If I refresh that, you'll see it flashes that unstyled content, or FOUC is the abbreviation for it. But we won't worry about that. There's an ng cloak you can put in there, and we can put devox UK. So that's pretty cool, right? That's Angular for you. But the interesting things about it is if you go in there and you take out this one little word, ng app, then you got nothing. It doesn't resolve. So that's that's the key component of Angular 1 is just that ng app. The other thing that's kind of cool is, I don't know if people know this. Back to my slides. The ng model update that you can do basically. Well, it's really raining out there, huh? Glad I wasn't walking out there now. I took a walk this morning. It's pretty nice. Not so much anymore. So we'll put that back. And then if you go down here, you can go ng model options and only update it on blur, right? So if you start typing in mat, we got to refresh again. There's no browser sync here. It doesn't do it until you tab off there, right? But another unknown thing is that on name, the one-way binding thing. Is anyone familiar with that? One-way binding, you put 2 dots in front of it or 2 colons, and then it basically only binds once. So there's a thing in Chrome. I think I have a plugin here. It's not on this profile, but it's called Watchers. It's $$ Watchers. It's for Angular 1, and basically allows you to see how many variables or expressions or whatever it is that Angular is watching on your page. And you might find that you have 10,000 on a large app, and you want to keep that at a reasonable number, and you don't want it to grow a lot. So the difference is once you have that in place, I can do mat, and it puts it there. But then I say, Fred. Nope, not going to update anymore. So it only updates it the first time. So if you have variables that are never going to change, it's a good idea to use those because then you reduce the number of watchers in your application. If you're doing internationalization and you're using like Angular Translate, good idea as well, except if you have people that might log in, 2 different locales on the same machine. So it can be tricky. Try it out. It can really reduce the memory size of your Angular applications. So I'll go back to mirroring. But if we're going to talk about the art of Angular in 2016, I think we have to talk about Angular 2. And if you look at Angular I/O, you notice what it says, one framework. That's why they took the JS off. It's not AngularJS anymore, it's Angular. And you can use it wherever you want. You can use it on mobile, desktop, web, everywhere. It's funny because when I read one framework, I read one framework to rule them all. I mean, that seems to be what everyone's trying to do now, right? Is create React that you can use everywhere. You can use these frameworks everywhere. So it's certainly possible, but I think it's a pretty hard thing to do. So if you look at Hello World with Angular 2, you'll notice we have our normal style sheet, but then you have to load some libraries. So the polyfills is for older browsers there, that shim for basically ES6 support. And then you have dist, the zones, which is the watcher support in Angular 2, so that's extracted out of Angular. And then the polyfills and the reflect metadata. And then finally, in this example, the System.js library for actually loading and initializing the application and loading modules. And then you can see here the System.js configuration. And a lot of examples, they've started taking that out of the index.html and putting that into a separate System.js config file. So if you look at any of the quick start examples on the Angular site, you won't see that 10 lines of code anymore. And then at the very bottom, it's got your component called my app or whatever your app is called in the HTML there. And then you'll have a main.ts for TypeScript, and you'll have a bootstrap and your component that's your main entry point, and you bootstrap it. And that's basically it, except it's not as easy as Angular 1. We're up to 4 or 5 files now, and then you have to create your main entry point, the component, which is actually my first Angular app. So there's a bit more work, up front, but we're used to that if you're Java developers, right? So the cool thing is they have generators just like we have in Java, with Maven archetypes and the ability to generate a seed application, or there's even an Angular CLI now that allows you to actually generate an application from the beginning. So I'm starting to feel a little artistic. So change my shirt. Something a little more artistic. Still keeping the Volkswagen theme. So with Angular 2, you get a few choices. You can use JavaScript, ES6, or TypeScript. Dart, basically anything that transpiles or compiles to JavaScript. And then for setting up your development environment, you'll probably need Node, a package manager like Webpack or System.js. Same thing with module loader, transpiler. You can use Raible. And a build tool. You can use NPM. A lot of people are doing that nowadays. You can use Grunt, but people will probably laugh at you. Gulp is a new hotness. Or just NPM as well. As far as ES6 versus TypeScript, you can do ES6, but you're probably going to have to transpile it to JavaScript anyway, because good old IE11. And that's not going away anytime soon. Even people on my team, at one of my clients right now, went to try to find Edge, and they couldn't even find Microsoft Edge, right? That's their latest and greatest browser. So I doubt the consumers are going to be able to go out and find Edge if developers can't. So you're probably still going to have to do that. You can use Raible or Tracer. A lot of the TypeScript examples I've seen use Tracer. A lot of the ES6 examples I've seen use Raible. Who's using Raible? A lot of the big companies. So I think it's okay. As far as emerging stacks, what I tend to see is if you're using TypeScript, you use NPM and System.js, Tracer, and Broccoli as a build tool. And if you're using ES6, a lot of people are using JSPM, System.js, Raible, and Gulp. So that's what's been out there. The easiest way to get started, in my opinion, is with Minko Getchev's Angular 2 seed. There's also the Angular 2 Quick Start. That is from Google and the Angular team. And that's probably the best way if you just want the bare bones, like the bare minimum. Because a lot of these other projects actually have all those System.js and everything in there. And I believe the Quick Start does too. But sometimes you just want to see the bare minimum. Because if you do npm install, these things can grow pretty big with the node modules. And Angular CLI. This is modeled off of Ember CLI. And Ember CLI has done just a really great job of how to do Hello World. So instead of copying, pasting 5 or 6 files, with Ember CLI you just run one command, you open one file, you paste some code in, boom, you're done, right? And so that's a great way to get started with the framework. And so basically Angular has copied that and even given credit to Ember for trailblazing that path. And now there's basically an ng command you can use to do a lot of things. So let's look under the hood of Angular 2. I'm going to start with Angular CLI, and I'm going to build a basic search feature that gets data via HTTP, has some unit tests, and has some integration tests. So I'll admit that I did cheat a little before I came here, because this stuff can take a while, right? Who wants to watch NPM? There we go. Did it again. Who wants to watch NPM install run? Nobody. All right, that's like watching MVN install run. So notice I did it, right before this talk. So I didn't do it yesterday. This is, all new. And what I did is I typed ng new ng2-demo. And so how do you install Angular CLI? The best way is to do npm -g install Angular CLI latest. If you don't use the latest on there, it actually might grab a different version. This was what I had to do to get the 1.0 beta 5, which has been out for about 2 weeks. So obviously I already installed it, so I don't have to do that. And it went ahead and created all these files for me. So whatever you name your application, it's going to create that ng2 demo for you. That's going to be your main component entry point. And then all the rest of these are environments, so it can have a dev environment versus prod environment, all the typings and things like that for TypeScript, and then some integration tests, end-to-end tests, and package.json, and everything else. So you type ng-serve. Oh, you got to be in the project. At least it tells you, right? It's pretty nice. Now if you open up your browser, it doesn't open your browser for you. There we go, hello world. All right, that took 10 seconds. Not bad. So if we go back to IntelliJ, I'm going to do a couple things here. Make that half, make this half. Get this guy into presenter mode. So you can see here the basic project structure. And this is app. This is where our components go. So this is our main component, CSS for it. And so, there's not much in there right now. And it's indexing. Don't you love the indexing? So this is one of those things that I've been stressed about. That's why I kind of created the thing beforehand, is I have had a lot of issues with the indexing in IntelliJ because of this npm install stuff. It puts like 1 million lines of JavaScript right in your project. And so if you run like npm test or npm e2e, which are commands from the Angular CLI, it'll cause IntelliJ to index. So I'm just warning you that if you try this at home, you might be sitting there going, what's going on? Oh, I did. You're not supposed to tell it to compile TypeScript. That's another thing. Hopefully we won't see any errors. You really don't, but it like brings up this thing on the bottom and says, hey, there's errors in your TypeScript when, if your app runs. There isn't. Works fine. But anyway. So to the command line, go back to here, and let me bring it up top so you guys can see it a little better. We start with, so this is one of the features you can do, ng generate, or type the whole word if you want, route search. So it's because we're creating a search component, so you see it creates those files for us. I go back here. Sure. So it created those files in here, and now we have this search component HTML, and we can go into this demo here and say, okay, add a link to that. Oop, wrong one. See my errors down there that aren't real errors? So I'm just adding a link. Close that. Save it. It's supposed to refresh over here, but we don't have it running anymore, so go back, ng-serve. And then refresh that one time. Now we got a link, and you can see you click on it, and it loads it in that router outlet right here. Normally, those links might be in a nav bar at the top, right? So it makes a little more sense that everything stays on the same page, and you are developing a one-page application. So now if we go back to that search, see, you got to wait for the indexing. And this is what it generates for you out of the box. So you have your component, you have your on init that you can implement if you want. The rain seems to be dying. So what the indexing prevents is live templates. Right? Live templates is a feature of IntelliJ IDEA where you can type in a couple characters and then hit Command J, and then it types a bunch of code for you. So that's what I use for these demos, and it's blocking me. So just a couple more seconds. But the cool thing is there's actually someone's went ahead and created these live templates for everyone to use. So it's not just I pre-recorded some of these for these demos, but there's Angular 2, I think live templates from IntelliJ. And mine start with ng2, but yeah, here's WebStorm templates. So you can actually download these into your IntelliJ, into your templates folder, and then you can type things like, not there, but ng2, and it'll do bootstraps, components, services, all that kind of stuff. So I prefixed mine with ng and search, and so you can see there that's similar to what's generated up above, but I have a couple variables here and the search controller initialized there. So if I delete this stuff up here, come on. Now we still got that, but we probably got a console message that says initialize search component down there. And then if we go ahead and change to our thing and say, okay, make that an actual form that people can search, then now we get, that. So now we're getting somewhere. And you'll notice here they've already done some stuff for us. So if we were creating this from scratch, that ng component, or this guy here, it's already got that search route in there. If you were creating a component from scratch, you'd have to go ahead and import it up here above, and then add this route right here. So you can see in those imports, it's actually got it in there from plus search. And the plus sign is actually for lazy loading. So that's an indicator to Angular to actually only load those JavaScript files or that module when it gets to that page. So that allows you not to have all that big upfront, 2 megabyte download of your app. It's got all that in there right away. So then if we go ahead and say, okay, well, we want to make that, a bit prettier, you can say, okay, where's that CSS file? Or it's just easier to type. Search component CSS. Not there, that one. And then do ng CSS. And you'll see that use the :host. So you're only modifying that component. Now there is a bug, and it's right here. Live reload after SAS file change. It's still open. So you'll notice I saved this file, nothing happened over here. So if I redo that, it's got a little more padding, right? You could say background, silver, right? And you'll notice it's just that component. So that is a bug that it doesn't actually change anything after you do the CSS with the CLI. So it is out there. They are working on it. So now we want to create a backend, right, to actually get our data. So under shared is where I put my services. So we'll create a new directory there, call it search data. Bless you. People JSON. And then we'll say go ahead and add it to Git. So the cool thing is I'm not checking this into GitHub right now, but it's Git aware. So even though I'm making all these changes, I could look and see all the changes I made to my projects files in the versions control pane. So the ng data. And I'm a Denver Broncos fan. I'm from Denver. I know you guys don't like American football, but sorry, I do. And it was a great year. We won the Super Bowl. So I got some of my favorite players in here. And then we'll create... we'll go back to the command line, and we're going to generate a service. So we'll do it in a separate window. ng2 demo and ngg service search. And so that creates, a spec and a TS, and they put it right in this main directory here. And I don't really want it there. I want it up here, so just a little moving around. Now we can go into that service. You'll see it's just got injectable by default and a constructor. And I'm going to make it do a get all to get people.json And I'm going to have a couple basically objects that we know you marshal the JSON into. So this is a constructor way of basically allowing you to pass in a JSON object that says street colon whatever, city colon whatever. And it's basically saying, hey, if they pass something in, then go ahead and set those. So it's just a fancy thing I learned from the NG2 book. And there's some errors over here, but we'll get rid of those shortly. So the first one is map, because you'll see here we're doing this HTTP GET, and then we're mapping it to the response and getting the JSON from there. So this was one of those things that probably took me an hour to figure out the first time. It's a simple import. So that's the good news. You can go into here to the demo component, the main entry point. We got to get that to expand. Expand. Well, we'll just type another one. So the import map, that's from RxJS. So now, we got past that. And so now to use that, we have to go back to our search component and import it. But the first thing you have to do is export it. So under the search service, it created an index for me. Oop, wrong one. Oh, so close. Command Q and Command 1 are so close to each other. Lost the whole thing. Thank God for SSD drives. I had to do a presentation once with the old style drives before we had SSDs, and this kind of process would have taken, I don't know, 2 minutes to load up. So back to presentation mode. We don't want to go back. We got to kind of reset things here. Got to get this one out. Get it back in. Oh, where's IntelliJ? IntelliJ's still in that mode. Oh, and it's indexing again. Oh well. We'll try it without having the two screens. So under shared, there's this index TS, and this is where you have to do basically export it. No, I don't want Python. So you're exporting that search service, and what you'll do is you'll end up creating a number of services under here for your various services, and then exporting each one of them. So anyone just has to import, shared index instead of importing each individual one. So back here, we want to import that. Both the person and the search service, and the reason for that is because our search results, we can say, hey, that's an array of person. Right? Now we can get strongly typed instead of just doing any. And to use the search service here, we can add that public search service, and then if you're doing not TypeScript, one of the features is by setting that as a public variable with TypeScript, it actually sets it as a local variable, so you can refer it to other places. If you're using EH6, it doesn't do that for you. So then to do that get all, we just add a search method here. We call get all, and that's how that works. And so then we have to do a couple more things. Let's see what our browser's doing over here. So it's saying that, see if I can bump that up. No provider for search service. So this is because in that main component we have to add it now. Back to into demo component. And you have to do import search service from, not form, shared index. And then you have to set it as a view provider. So this is a separate property because we have components that are using it. View providers, search service. So now if we go back, oh, so close. I'm showing these errors for you, so when you see them, you can be like, hey, Matt told us about this. This one's no provider for HTTP. So then you go back here and you say, okay, well, how about importing some HTTP? What is it? ng import. So HTTP providers, and then it has to be listed as a provider here. Then you go back, and now we can do something like that, and look, we get data. So we're getting somewhere, and then we want this to look a little better. So we can do ng table. Now the syntax has changed. It used to be ng repeat, and then they had this proprietary syntax, as it was like hash, person of search results and hash I equals index. They changed this between the beta releases and the RC release, so now they use standard JavaScript basically with let. And so now if we go back here, you can search, and you get that. And now we can say, well, we want it to look better. Try not to get dizzy from IntelliJ. And we can say, add some tables and stuff, make it look better. But it's still not actually searching. All right, it's still just bringing back, oh, we got to refresh if we want it to look better. So it looks better, but it's still not actually searching. So in our search service, we need a method that actually searches. So it says, hey, if query string is passed in, then go ahead and just stringify all the data and look for a result in there. And then we got to change this guy to say search and this.query. And so we're setting this.query up here with this ng model here. This is the way you do two-way binding with Angular 2, is you put the brackets around it and you do these guys. So then we can say, okay, well, pay. And it'll bring back just that first one. So that's how you do, the regular stuff. Who wants to see unit and integration testing? Okay, that's enough. Sometimes that's a boring subject. People want to skip it, so we'll go ahead and keep going. So for unit testing, how you run those is you do ng test. This is for Angular CLI. And it goes through and it launches Karma in your browser and says, hey, you got 3 tests that are failing. And so the first reason for that is they generated a couple tests for us. So if we go back, there's this search service spec. Oh, it's indexing again. I ran npm test. See, there it goes. So you do like most JavaScript developers do. You delete it. Didn't they do a study where they found like 76% of JavaScript developers weren't writing tests? So I think a lot of it's because they're running them in the browser, right? But we still have that test in our system, so it's still executing it. Okay, we still got a couple failures, but we'll get around that. So now we have this search component spec, which really doesn't have anything in it either. But in order to set things up so I have a mock service, the first thing I want to do is go into here and create a mocks directory. I tried to search in just how to turn off indexing and couldn't find that. So if anyone knows how to do that, hit me up. I'll be at the speakers table tonight at, I think, 6:45 if you want to come by and show me how. That'd be great. So the first thing, we're going to create this search service.ts. Hopefully it's about to finish indexing. There's a couple other helpers I'm going to create. So with Angular 2 beta, they had this spy object that you could actually import into your project, and you can use it. And if you've ever used Jasmine spies, it basically allows you to spy on a method and say, hey, was this called, or how many times was this called, or was it called with this data? So it can be a very handy feature. So for a search mock service, what I do is I create an actual object that extends from that spy object. And what happened between the beta and the release candidate was they basically took out the spy object from being a public API or public use. So now I'm going to actually have to create a helper.ts file that has, basically any test objects or test methods you might need in there, and then we have to extend that. And then I'm also going to create a routes.ts, and that routes is basically a way for you to say, hey, I'm going to pass in a parameter in the constructor, and the constructor is going to receive it and do something with it. So it's a way of mocking out, sending in parameters. And then from there, I'll write a couple tests, and then we'll do an integration test as well. So in the interest of time, I might actually just write these, and not, and that in the background where it's doing ng test, that should pass when we're all done. Come on, baby. So close. Old Python. Okay, so the first one is ng mock service. And I'm happy to share these live templates that I pre-recorded as well. So you can see here, this imports that search service and then just takes and spies on all the different methods in it. The get and the save I implemented, but I have in another project, so that's why those are in there. And then we create this helper.ts, which has that spy object that we're extending. So no one really wants to type that, right? That's not an easy JavaScript class there. And then the routes, which is kind of easy. You can hear my fan going there. Come on, IntelliJ. Create a file for me. There we go. We call this one routes.ts. And so that just implements route segment, which is an interface from Angular. They used to call it route params between the beta and the RC. They deprecated it. If they do that again, it's not a very good RC candidate, right? But there was an interesting thing that went on for NGConf. NGConf is a major conference that happens in Salt Lake City in the US. And they actually scrapped the router that was in Angular 2 and rewrote it like a week or two before the conference. And they wrote it for the conference, right? It was conference demoware. And so if you go to the docs, there are none, right? It says these are coming. If you want to look at the deprecated router, you can. And so the deprecated router is still available. You can basically import it and use it if you want to go that route. But they've basically created a new one. So now if we go back to our search component, we can start with our own framework that basically says, okay, import the route segment and that search segment. And then you can see here on the bottom, we're providing the term Peyton and Manning as basically parameters that you pass in. And then on that same level, you do ng-unit tests. And we're saying should search when a term is set and search is called. And so search automatically when this term is on the URL. So if we go back and see if these are passing, we only have one that failed, so that's not bad. We're getting better. No provider for HTTP and search service. That should work. Let's try again. I think it's that same import, but oh well. We got to move along now. I'll fix that later. So then the last thing is doing an integration test. So under E2E, if you do new file search.e2e.ts, oh, it's indexing. Well, anyway, it's a nice little end-to-end test that basically one of the things you do have to do with Angular 2 that I found out after getting it running on Travis CI is in your before each, you have to start from the top level and navigate down. And with Angular 1, you could just say #/search and get to that actual component. You can locally, but that's running on like the Node live web server that you install by default. When you're actually doing on Travis CI or another system, you have to start at the top, navigate down to that search component by clicking on the link or whatnot, and then you get there. So that's just a warning. So now we unmirror. So I'm feeling a bit more artistic. Got my hat here. Got this just down the street yesterday. So we looked at the Angular 2 demo. There's a number of built-in components in Angular 2. You see there's an ng-if, ng-switch, and switch when, then ng-style, ng-class, and ng-for. And as I said, the for syntax kind of changed in the last couple weeks. With Angular 2 forms, I'm going to breeze through this part because most of this is just information that you put on the slides. You guys can come back to it and read it and figure out how to do forms and do validation. But basically, Angular provides controls, validators, and observers. You start with a control by creating a class and a value in that class if you want. And you can query that control, whether it has errors, dirty, or valid, in your JavaScript. And then to define it, use ng-control equals name, in your HTML. If you want to control group, so you have a bunch of controls that you want to group together and do validation on those, you can. You just create a JavaScript object, basically a JSON notation, and then you can get the value for that, and it prints out all those different values. If you're using forms in your pages, you'll want to import form directives from Angular Common, and then to actually use that in a component, you'll import the directives. You'll have a template that has ng form, and then you'll have an ng submit that calls whatever in your component, whatever method you want, and then again you'll have that ng control in there, and a button. And for the submit, this is what your on submit might look like. Just takes that form in, and then can print out those values or can do whatever with those values. You can also use a form builder that actually takes and builds a form, has a group of controls, and uses a little bit simpler syntax, so you don't have to do new control name. You just do name and then the value if you need a value in there. And then to write it in your HTML, it'll look similar, but you use ng form model when you're using a form builder like that, and the form control refers to that form model. So that's kind of boring stuff to talk about, but if you want to do validation, shows you how to do validation. That stuff will all be in my slides, so you can come back to that. For data architectures, there's many ways to get data into your application. I got 10 minutes left, so feeling pretty artistic. This is one of the things that I've been waiting to do all day. Notice this mustache needs a little wrangling, so I got the mustache wax. Yeah, curl it up at the ends there. If anyone needs some. I grew this mustache just for this conference. So, many ways to get data into your application: HTTP requests, WebSockets, IndexedDB, local storage, service workers, all that. There's also the two-way binding, and RxJS is one of the hot ways to get it in there with observables. And so instead of having information, a JSON endpoint, you might still do it this way, but with observables, you can actually take advantage of those reactive backends and streams, and you can subscribe to those streams. And so one of the problems we have in single-page applications is I load this page of tasks, for instance, in this project management application, and I drag and drop those tasks around. Well, someone else logs into that same project and looking at tasks, they actually don't have that reordered task group. Right? So you can use server-side events, you can use WebSockets, you can use streams and RxJS on the front end to actually subscribe to those events, so someone else in their other application will see those things moving around. So that's a pretty nice thing. It's a functional way of developing applications, and streams are composable. Some things you might be interested in are style guides. These are a great way for you to basically implement on your projects, and then you can move between projects, and the code often looks pretty much the same. Sun did this with Java, and there's a lot of Java style guides out there. So for Angular 1, there's an Angular style guide from John Papa. If you go to that, there is a link for Angular 2. You click on that, you scroll down a bit, and it says, hey, guess what? Angular 2 adopted this style guide as their official style guide. So he did such a good job with Angular 1 that now it's an Angular 2 style guide. It's the official style guide. There's also Minko Getchev's Angular 2 style guide. He's the guy that wrote that Angular 2 seed. If you've read my blog, there's a couple tutorials I wrote in the last week that use that Angular 2 seed instead of Angular CLI. And so I used his style guide there. And you might have noticed even in my demo that there were some imports that had spaces after the curly brace, and then some that didn't. IntelliJ's taken those spaces out for me, and I tried to tell it stop taking those spaces out. But the official style guide says to put a space, before and after the curly brace, which doesn't really make a difference. So I don't know if it's important, but it's there. So if you want to upgrade from Angular 1 to Angular 2, there's two ways to do it. Basically, Big Bang, where you just do everything, and then incremental. The Big Bang is you start a spike in Angular 2 and replace the entire app once you're done, right? You just replace it all. Incremental, you can upgrade existing app or service or a component or whatever, one at a time. And you can do that with ng upgrade, which allows you to basically import from Angular upgrade, and then you have this upgrade adapter that bootstraps your regular Angular module. And you can also upgrade Angular 1 components to Angular 2, and you can downgrade Angular 2 components to Angular 1. So those are all like single line commands. So there's a number of other cool projects around Angular 2. Web workers and service workers, this is a pretty cool way to get background services that we have capabilities in our browser to do a lot of the heavy lifting of Angular, and this is one of the ways they've been able to make it a lot faster. You can't interact with the DOM, but you can do communication with HTTP and use service workers post-message support. It's like a programmable network proxy as far as service workers. And then web workers are like parallelism for the web, so it allows you to do multiple things at the same time. And then Angular, or Universal Angular 2, allows you to run Angular on the server, and they are working on a Java version of that. So basically, instead of sending out your HTML, waiting for the JavaScript to load, it sends everything out already rendered, and then your app is a regular JavaScript app after that. Electron is from GitHub. Those guys created the Atom text editor, which is pretty nice to work with. That's all based on JavaScript and browser technologies. So you can basically write desktop apps with Angular as well. They've open sourced that toolkit. If you look for Electron Angular 2, it's out there. That Angular 2 seed application that I mentioned, that project, has an advanced version that has support for Electron. NG2, Bootstrap, and Feel UI. If you're used to using Bootstrap in your projects, that will certainly work with Angular 2. That Angular Watchers plugin I mentioned, you can use for Angular 1. It'll see how many watchers are on your page. It's a Chrome plugin. And then JHipster. JHipster is a project that has Spring Boot on the back end, Angular on the front end. I'm doing a talk about that at 5:30 today. And we're starting to work on Angular 2 support for that project as well. Currently, it's just Angular 1, but Angular 2 is coming. And if you look at these slides, I'll upload them to SlideShare probably later tonight or tomorrow. They'll probably have them for the conference. All these are links, so you can click on all those links in the PDF or whatnot. I highly recommend NG Book 2 for developing Angular 2. These guys have done a great job of keeping it up to date. So it's had 33 releases since it first came out, and they're adding releases all the time. So it's a great way to learn how to write components, use forms, and do the whole testing thing. If you want to see who's using Angular, there's Made with Angular, Built with Angular 2, and if you're on Twitter, 5 Things Angular is a pretty good feed to subscribe to, or users to subscribe to. They've been okay about posting stuff. They had a couple good weeks there, and haven't had much in the last couple weeks. So everyone's asking, when will Angular 2 be released? Well, the release candidate's 66% complete for the second release candidate, I would imagine, and then Angular 2 final. So one of my theories was that they were going to do it by Google I/O. That went by, right? That's not around anymore. So I don't know now when. It could be the end of the year, right? There's no longer like conference motivation for them to get it done. So, how to become an artist. You learn from others. You enroll in local art classes. You study the masters. And I'm feeling pretty artistic. And I think, artists like a little wine. So I always like to end my talks with a little drink. Sorry, nothing for you. There's a shortcut, however. You can just do it. Just pick up the tools, start writing code, start developing apps, start prototyping in your companies, on your projects, and it's that's the most satisfying thing is writing code and seeing it work. And so I encourage you to do that. If you have any questions, like I mentioned, I'll be at the speakers table. You can ask them right now. We got 2 minutes left. You can contact me online. I'll upload these presentations, and thanks for coming. Any quick questions? We can have 2. Or we can have 0. All right. You guys are free to go, I guess.